Welcome back. If you are just joining us, this is INX Prime Live. Remember, we are on your screens every single Monday to Friday between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. Now, we know that China has pledged about 50 billion US dollars in support across Africa over the next 3 years. Now, the money will be spent on infrastructure projects, which are expected to create more or less about 1 million jobs. Now, the announcement was made at the ongoing Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit in Beijing. And China is the world's biggest bilateral lender. And with this pledge, 3 times as many infrastructure projects will actually be built across the resource-rich continent. Now, we are actually going to be chatting to Ikenna Emewu, who is actually the editor-in-chief of Africa China Economy magazine. And he joins me right now from Nigeria. Good evening, Mr. Emewu. It's great to have you here on INX Prime Live.
Thank you, Alex. It's my pleasure to be here.
No, it's such a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to get straight into this conversation. Now, 53 African countries are represented in this year's summit. How significant is this pledge of 50 billion, especially that most, African countries are already in a lot of debt to multiple creditors, including China themselves?
Yes. I want to tell you that, or remind you that every country is in debt one way or the other. The largest debtor country to the United Nations and its organs is the United States of America. You being in debt isn't a big problem. The problem is how you manage what you got that's indebted you. So if there's a pledge from FOCAC on this, and Africa decides to utilize it properly, it will benefit Africa and the debt will be repayable. The way somebody loans money to you, even on his terms, doesn't really matter as much as how you decide to utilize what was loaned to you. So I don't encourage Africa to go on borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. There should be a limit to borrowing as it enshrines. Your loan exposure should be a certain percentage of your GDP. But most of all, if Africa should borrow, let Africa utilize what is borrowed efficiently and judiciously. That is where the major issue lies.
No, without a doubt. I mean, I'm just looking at some of the visuals as well, where we are looking at some of the, African dignitaries and presidents coming in and meeting with the president of China as well and his wife. We're looking at some of the comments that came out of this, and we know that the emphasis is on infrastructure. So they are going to be looking at land and sea infrastructure with some of the military deals as well. I wanted to know, in your opinion, how is China's, we know about it for quite a while now, but how has China's Belt and Road Initiative benefited African countries over the last few years?
In my modest assessment, Africa has benefited from China's BRI in infrastructure advancement and industrialization. In my country, Nigeria, as an instance, early last year, the Lekki Deep Seaport was commissioned in Lagos, and that is the largest seaport in West Africa right now. In the past 5 years, not up to 6 years, the Chinese construction company that is now like the most dominant in Nigeria has finished and completed about 772 kilometers of railway. They never existed in Nigeria prior to that. A lot of empowerment, human capital advancement has already taken place. A lot of Africans now study in China. They tap into their knowledge base, and that's one way or the other helps in advancing Africa. I know there are challenges, but I don't think Africa has fared badly in the hands of China under the Belt and Road Initiative, especially even when the whole world has acknowledged that the highest infrastructure funder in Africa is China, up to 35%. And no, the entire European Union and G7 doesn't come up to that level. So there's a benefit. But I go back to the issue earlier mentioned, how effectively or efficiently do you utilize these benefits?
Yeah, that's very, very important. And hopefully the money is used correctly. But when we're talking about infrastructure, hopefully it is spent correctly. Also, the concept of repayment, like you did mention, is definitely a conversation that we all
Hello.
have to chat about. But I just want to understand, in recent years, right, we have seen, obviously the US has always been a superpower and everyone has always been using the dollar. And now we've been hearing over the last few years this change
Mhm.
in terms of new currencies as well. We've also seen the rise of influence of the global south with the BRICS group that have come through in terms of those countries, which is obviously the likes of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and obviously some of the new entrants as well. What will an alignment with China do for countries on the continent of Africa?
Sorry, alignment, is it in what in financial sector or the usage of currencies? Can you please make it clearer for me to answer?
Yeah, I think just the alignment in terms of understanding, the growth of economy in these different countries as well. I mean, we talk about BRICS and we talk about the monopoly of the US, currency in that sense, the economy. Now that
Mhm.
we're starting to see this idea of a BRICS coin and BRICS dollars as well, and also a BRICS
Mhm.
currency, it's starting to open up the economy to allow other entrants into this space and some other superpowers like Russia and China as well. I wanted to know, what will an alignment with China do for countries on the continent of Africa, more specifically with this $50 billion investment?
The benefits are there. For instance, you mentioned the BRICS currency or BRICS coin or whatever it is, the name. That is still in the pipeline. It hasn't actually matured or manifested yet. But I think it would be a bad idea because the monopoly of the US dollars in international transactions has been utilized or weaponized to undo a lot of economies. And Africa is a major victim of that weaponization of the US dollar. I would want a situation where there could be alternatives or options you can choose from instead of you being straitjacketed into utilizing the US dollars or nothing happens. There was a time that four African countries discussed uh, currency swap with China, their central banks with the Chinese central bank. That makes some sense to me. Yes, I know we shouldn't hurry into these things because even China has part of its, in fact, has the largest pool of foreign reserve domiciled in the US dollars, just like all African countries. But systematically, they should be encouraged. You take this out, you replace it with another one. Let us not put all our eggs in one basket. And that's also what I advocate in China, Africa related with China. Our relationship should be diverse. You gain from this, you gain from the other, because all of them don't push the same agenda or the same policy direction.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just listening to some of the comments and questions coming in from social media. We do have
Okay.
James saying that, what, perhaps all this mineral wealth that we have in Africa is actually a good thing, but a lot of it is being taken away by countries like China. We also have other people sharing their opinions to say that it's actually the best thing that has ever happened because smaller communities and towns in South Africa are getting developed by the Chinese. So we have a lot of different opinions, and some are positive, some negative. I wanted to know, in your opinion, would it be a mistake to not mention Africa's vast mineral wealth? Like we did say now, many people have spoken about the scramble for African resources. Is Africa actually getting a fair deal for its riches from China?
Let me put it this way. You are an African. I am an African. One thing we shouldn't continue to do is to blame other people for whatever situation or fix we find ourselves. We are the major contributor to the problems and challenges of Africa. The only people that can change it are Africans. Now, this is 2024 for crying out loud. This is not 1894. So if anybody comes to undo Africa in trade relations, in taking our mineral resources, the person stops us from empowering ourselves with the basic infrastructure in Africa to manufacture. Then the people that came before China, were they better to Africans? No. Why is it so that Africa has been a victim of a chain of victimizations for over 2,000 years? Sorry, 200 years. It is because Africa has been docile in pulling its weight. India was a victim of the West. China itself was a victim of the West. Indonesia was a victim of the West. How come these other parts of the world have risen? Dubai is a new story. Qatar is a new story. How come they have risen and Africans don't thrive? I'm not saying these people don't undo Africa, but Africa is the major problem of Africa. If you say we don't want to export our crude resources, that we want to process them and create a value chain, we have the capacity to do this.
No, that's very interesting, without a doubt, Mr. Ikenna, and I do agree with you. I think it
what
is.
China is today.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, it's definitely something that we have to look at, and I think we have to hold our governments accountable as well, without a doubt. But again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I think it's been such an incredible conversation chatting to you out in Nigeria as well. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
That is definitely the position.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. That is Mr. Ikenna, who is the editor-in-chief of Africa China Economy magazine, just sharing with us more information about this $50 billion investment that they are going to be putting into Africa over the next 3 years. Now, on that note, we are going to take a quick ad break. We'll come right back.